Hey there, welcome. If you enjoy educational content about sex, sexuality, and relationships that inspires and informs, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Also, please drop a comment to share your thoughts and questions. Welcome back to our second episode of talking about sex issues for helping professionals. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Martha Kauppi. I'm a marriage and family therapist and also a certified sex therapist, and I train therapists all over the world to work with sex issues more effectively. So I'm really happy you're here. And if you're a coach or another helping professional, I'm talking to you too. So today I want to think about why we as helping professionals tend to find the prospect of asking about sex issues so stressful, and maybe more importantly, offer some solutions so that you can feel more comfortable. There's one really obvious answer to why this is hard. We haven't been taught to do it. Were you taught to do it? I was not taught to do it. Education for therapists and other mental health care providers, or for coaches and clergy and other helping professionals, tend to be pretty minimal. In fact, many helping professionals get zero training in working with sex issues, actually zero. It's very understandable to be concerned about getting outside of your scope of practice when you had no training and you have no role models. You also might not feel like you know what to do with the information that your clients share with you. And honestly, in the US and many other places, it's very difficult to get accurate information about sex. You're exactly right if you think that you might not have all the answers. I've been doing this for a long time and I don't have all the answers. So that presents a huge block for a lot of therapists. But stick with me because I absolutely can help. So, another aspect of what's hard about this is it's a taboo topic. We're not supposed to talk about it. Many of us were trained to not talk about it, either in our family of origin or through the school of hard knocks as we have grown and gotten experience. You might be worrying, and it's really common to worry that you'll freak your client out or seem nosy or creepy or inappropriate if you bring it up. This might be the first time your client ever talked about sex with anyone, and it might be the first time you ever talked about sex with anyone. I want to tell you one thing about that. First of all, thank you for being here if that describes you. And secondly, it is not inappropriate to bring up a topic. It is inappropriate to force a topic down someone's throat, but opening a topic, that is not inappropriate. So if you bring up sex and your client says no, thank you, just say, I appreciate your honesty. If something comes up later on, keep it in mind that this is a safe place to talk about it, and then just move on. Another challenge that many of us have is unresolved feelings and challenges related to sexuality ourselves. There can easily be a feeling of being an imposter when you're trying to act as a healer in an area where you're not fully healed. And this is really common. So let's go a little bit deeper with this. For many of us, we learned at an early age that sex was something shameful and that bringing it out into the open and talking about it would lead to judgment or some other bad outcome. There are a lot of ways to learn that, and everybody has some of these experiences. One way to learn about it is implied learning. When nobody ever talks about sex, but you know sex exists, then the implied message is we don't talk about that. The emotional vibe informs exactly why we think it isn't supposed to be discussed. So that's implied and intuitive meaning making that can be pretty individual as well. But implicit learning is when you make meaning of something that doesn't make sense and solve the problem for yourself, often by never talking about it because your family culture or your social culture is just not to talk about it. We also might learn about it explicitly. That's where you observe somebody bringing up sex, or you bring it up and the response is negative in some way. So you try an experiment and you get something back that is uncomfortable or in some way not something you want to repeat. The exact reaction you observe or experience informs the meaning that you make and how you carry it forward and with what degree of intensity. But that is, in fact, how we learn. We try something and then we see what happens, or we watch somebody else do it and learn from that, or in this case, not do it. Somebody also might learn that sex is bad, or that we shouldn't talk about it, or that it's scary from having personal experience with inappropriate sexual encounters, especially if it isn't discussed and handled in an appropriate way. So from there, it's a very short step to avoiding the topic completely out of self-protection, and so understandable. So I want to remind you that all of your clients have had some kind of implicit or explicit learning about sex as well as you. We all learn how to regard this topic, whether for better or for worse. So I want to invite you to take a moment of personal reflection. What is your personal history with this topic? I'm going to ask you a few questions about this, and as I do, you might take the opportunity to jot down a few notes. First, think of a typical or a memorable time that sex was discussed in your family of origin. Can you think of one? How did it come up? Who brought it up and why? Was it a comfortable conversation? Did it feel appropriate and boundaried? Did it feel informative? Was it ultimately helpful? Were your feelings considered and discussed? By the way, if I'm moving too fast, that's okay. Use the pause button and then continue when you're ready. If you're thinking of a particular example or a general culture that was uncomfortable, what did you think that was about? And what did you take away from your early experiences about talking about sex? Did you learn it's okay to talk about sex? It's super comfortable, it's informative, it's interesting. Or did you learn that it's inappropriate or even dangerous? What do you now believe? Do you believe it's okay to talk about sex under certain circumstances with certain people? What do you now believe? And now, in your current life, who do you talk to about sex? If you have a sex partner, do you talk to them about the sex that you have? Do you talk to them about your ideas about sex and your questions about sex? Is it easy or hard to discuss? And if you don't have a sex partner, who do you talk to? Or do you? What do you think makes it either easy or hard to talk about sex currently in your life? And I'm curious, what do you think would make it a little bit easier? And is that something that there's a part of you that is curious to explore out loud with somebody important to you? Do you have any good role models of people who are comfortable talking about sex in ways that feel easy to be around, not awkward, and appropriately boundaried? Lots of people don't. And until you do have good role models, it's so understandable that you might feel nervous talking about sex. Who wouldn't? This is okay. Stick with me. I'm happy to be a role model for you. I talk about sex a lot. It's part of my job. It's part of my everyday, but it didn't used to be, and I had to learn how to do it. By the time you get to the end of this series, you're certainly going to have spent some time with at least one person who feels comfortable talking about sex and does it easily and a lot. That's me. And I'm so glad you're here. By the way, if you missed the first video, go back and watch it because in it, I ask what you want to experience that's different from what you're experiencing now. I'm inviting you to get in touch with yourself in the context of talking about sex because what you want to experience is so important to me. And it ultimately is what should help develop where you move toward. What's important to me is irrelevant in a certain way. Figuring out what's important to you is what is going to eventually guide any movement that you experience. Now, let's talk about sexual learning. How do we get information about sex and how should we get information about sex? How do we and how should we? Most young people have lots of natural curiosity about sex. If you've ever hung around with very young people, you'll know that kids are curious about bodies in general and genitals in specific. They ask questions, they touch themselves for pleasure, and they're generally open and curious beings until and unless they learn not to be. So, again, back to you. How did you get information about sex when you were young? When you had a question, how did you get answers? And what was that experience like? Did you have sex education in school? What was it like? Did it mostly discuss reproduction? Did it cover sexual pleasure? And while we're talking about sexual pleasure, has anybody ever in your history openly talked about sexual pleasure as a part of your learning? When you were old enough to seek out information for yourself, how did you seek it? And were you able to find it? And was what you found actually relevant to what your question was? So, looking back on it now, overall, do you think your sex education was adequate? Was there anything important about sex or sexuality you didn't learn early enough? Anything you would have liked to have learned earlier than you did? How much of what you learned about sex was actually assumed or implied rather than actually taught? How much of what you learned about sex did you take away from reading erotic writing or watching erotic video? Do you think you got enough information about sex? Do you think the information you got was accurate? Do you think it was complete enough? Do you have young people in your life? How confident are you about providing them with accurate, sufficient, and sex positive information about sex? Without enough accurate information, and by enough, I mean information that actually answers all of your questions, it's so understandable that you might not feel confident taking the lead with the topic of sex with your clients. You want to make sure you can move the conversation forward with skill, of course, and you don't want to miss something important. You want to help, you don't want to harm. All good. I've got you. Stick with me. So, we've talked about how you and your clients too learned how to regard sex and conversations about sex, and then how you were taught actual information about sex. And before we move on, I want to let you know that most people don't receive adequate sex education. So if that describes you or your client, that is by far the largest group. Remember, I don't think sex education is adequate unless it answers all the questions a person has coming up and then also involves some follow-up from time to time because more questions are going to arise. I want sex education to cover consent in a lot of detail. I don't want anybody to be fuzzy on what consent is or how to do it or how to do it in a sexy way. I'd like sex education to include conversations about safety, including sexy routines of using barriers and discussing sexual history. I would like an explicit discussion of sexual pleasure for all involved. And I think sex education should include a discussion of anatomy for pleasure and not just for reproduction. And I want everyone to have basic information about gender diversity and sexual orientation and attraction. I want relationships built between young folks and trusted adults to have follow-up conversations available about this material anytime so that as questions arise, there's a way to handle them and to develop the topic in ways that fit the curiosity of the youth. You might wonder why my definition of adequate sex education includes answering all of the questions for all of the people all of the time. That's a pretty lofty goal, but here's why. If someone has questions about sex and can't get the information from trusted sources, what are they going to do? What do you think they do? I can tell you what they're going to do. They are going to go to the internet, and that's going to very quickly get them some adult entertainment video erotica. I'm wording it like that for a very specific reason. Most easily accessible free pornography is created for the purpose of adult entertainment. It's erotic entertainment for adults. It was never intended to be sex education or to be for youth. This is important because as sex education goes, porn does a terrible job of it. But let's be honest, for a whole lot of people, free internet porn is the bulk of all the sex education they get. So think for a minute. What are we learning from porn and what is missing? Here is a place for my disclaimer about pornography. Not all porn is created equal, so I don't want to lump it all together. Some erotic film is created for educational purposes specifically, but most is not. Some depicts relationships and not just sex, including interactions between people around desire, pleasure, safety, and consent, and most does not. Some depicts using barriers and having conversations about safer sex, and including personal sex history information. Most porn does not include that. Some will show how to work with realities of sex, like softening erections, using lubricant from a bottle, and real unaltered bodies. And most porn doesn't show that stuff. But when I use the term pornography, I want to explicitly acknowledge that porn is not all alike. Generally, if it's free and you stumbled upon it with an internet search, like your 8-year-old is going to do, some aspect of sex they're curious about is going to pop up. It's going to be free internet porn, and that is not going to be the really helpful kind of educational porn. You have to pay for and go looking for educational pornography specifically. Okay, now back to talking about sex in therapy. Are you now curious a little bit about experimenting with bringing up sex in the course of your work? Is it important to you in some way for some reason? If it's important to you for reasons that you can identify, important to you yourself, then you're in touch with some motivation. And that motivation is going to help you do a hard thing that might be a stretch. So the next step then, if you have the desire to get somewhere different from where you are and some clarity about why it's important to you, the next step is to just begin wondering how you might run a small experiment, or at least move in the direction of running a small experiment, because trying something new is a really great teacher. You will learn a lot when you try it out. Wherever you're starting from, I don't know a better way to build confidence than to go out and do the thing, whatever the thing might be. And in this case, the thing would be bringing up sex in therapy. At the end of this video, I'm going to give you very specific language you might try out if you're having trouble coming up with your own. So it's going to feel a lot easier and better to try this out with your clients when you've already said the words a couple of times in a couple of different ways in some kind of context where you're not so anxious about it, or where you can work through your anxiety and attend to your feelings, which it's much harder to do when you're facing a client. So there's a cheat code for this: role play. Practice, 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 more practice, ideally with very low stakes. So I encourage you to email the link to this video to a colleague and invite them to watch the series and then practice with you. Take turns. Have the experience of being the client and see what it feels like to be asked the questions. As you role play, have your role play partner experiment with different kinds of language and see what helps you as the client move into a curious space and feel comfortable. Try being the therapist and develop some practice and eventually some ease in asking. Try out a whole bunch of different responses to the questions so that you're not thinking, oh my gosh, I'm fine unless they ask this. Ask this and then go ahead and prepare for every scenario that you can think of that worries you even a little bit. Now, if you're thinking, but Martha, what if they say this? Or Martha, what if my client reacts badly in this specific way? That's what the next video is for. I'll talk about the client reactions that most people tend to worry about, and I'll show you how to respond. For instance, if you're worried that raising the topic of sex and sexuality might lead to your client saying something that feels inappropriate to you, we'll talk about how to prepare for that scenario. And if you're worried you want to have all the answers, which will definitely happen, I'll help you prepare for that scenario as well. Now, here comes the language. If you need some of my language to get you started practicing, here is my tried and true question. Is there anything about sex and sexuality you think you might want to discuss in the course of our work together? Is there anything about sex or sexuality you think you might want to discuss as we work together? Go try it out with a friend or a client, see how it feels. If you're going to try this with a client you've been working with for some time, you might phrase it slightly differently. You might say, I'm taking an internet course about the importance of talking about sex for helping professionals, and it got me thinking. I never asked you. And I am actually open to the conversation. So I'm going to ask now, is there anything about sex or sexuality you think you might be helpful to discuss? Or if that just feels like not your jam, you might notice an opening when your client is discussing something you think might actually be related to sexual intimacy, as well as some other context in their life. So you might say something like, I wonder if that particular dynamic shows up in your intimate life. Does it? How do you handle it when it does? If you're not looking for that opening and asking that question, you're missing an enormous opportunity. Essentially, you're not opening the door when your client is literally facing the door. So now you've got lots of language. Go give it a try. Join me for the next video when I'll be talking about various responses you might get that might be hard for you to handle and helping you handle them well. I'm so happy you're here, and I'll see you soon. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful or inspiring, please give it a like. If it brought up some deep thoughts or new questions, that's great. Please leave a comment or a question. I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to make sure you're always part of the conversation, hit subscribe, and I'll see you soon in my next video.